Welcome back to the podcast. We've got a great writer on today. We've got Christian Muntean on with us from Train to Lead, a book that finally says us folks in construction, a lot of our folks as leaders, bring our people up, but we don't learn we don't train them to lead. And Christian, I'm excited about having you on. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. It's good to be here.
As I look at my past and some of my experiences with growing companies, I haven't always been great at, raising people up. Someone does well, you bring them into a new position, you've got the position well defined, but you don't spend a lot of time training the leader you've just promoted.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Most people leave it to chance. They leave success to chance when it comes to those kinds of things.
But they were a good employee. They were doing great in the position they were in. Of course, won't they do good at leadership?
No. It's called there's a concept around this called, false attribution. And it's basically the idea that you're good at one thing. You're a good project manager, therefore you'll be good at leading a team. And it's two different skill sets. And that happens all the time. In construction in particular, it happens frequently. If you're really good at bringing in business, if you're really good at executing on projects, then you get promoted. And then as companies grow or try to grow, they find that they're stuck really at the level of leadership. And leadership is what allows a company to double or triple in size or not.
Well, I mean, so you're saying that a project manager or, someone's great at project management, customers are happy, they do a great job of being profitable. They do a great job of running the people on the job site. Now I want to take them from project manager, I want to make them into a director, right? What's some of the downfalls? What should I be expecting? What should I be thinking about as a company when I look at that and looking to grow that employee?
Yeah, there's no downfalls. It's fine to grow your own that way. The challenge or the thing to look out for is 95% of project management is very technical. And most PMs are going to be very technical, very in the weeds with their projects, very into their spreadsheets, very into that kind of thing. And as you move up in leadership, the need to be able to work with people better and to be able to work broadly with teams and strategically with teams becomes more and more important until you finally get to the role of, whatever it is, CEO, president, owner. At that level, that should be almost entirely your job, is growing people and navigating people and helping people move forward. And I think that's the missing component. Usually as people move up in any industry, in the health industry and retail and anything, as you move up, the job becomes less about the technical skills or the sales skills that made you successful and more about the ability to work with people broadly and strategically.
Well, so how do I build a successful, structure for growing leaders?
That's a great question. And I think there's maybe two answers to that. If you're a very large company, I think it's worth investing in building a whole program and a structure. If you're not a very large company, I would say if you're under, let's say 50 million or 100 million in revenue, then it becomes a little unrealistic to have a set training structure. What's helpful is to have an awareness or a mindset that you have a pathway that you're going to lead leaders through as you're going to promote them. And so, like many of my clients utilize me as an outside resource so they don't have to maintain that structure. But I think a lot of it just has to do with being aware that we're going to have to walk somebody through certain growth steps if they're going to be successful as we promote them, so that we don't. In management, there's this concept that's classically called the Peter principle, which is people get promoted to their highest level of incompetence. They do well, you promote them. You do well, they promote them. Till they're in a position where they don't do well, then nobody knows what to do with them because they were a great employee. They've been here for 20 years, and now they're doing lousy at this management position you gave them. And you like the guy, but he's not performing. What do you do with it? And it can be a very tricky thing. And so what we want to do is be able to forecast people's aptitudes and capacities and then prepare them for the responsibilities and the load that you're going to put on them if they're the right person for that job.
So when you say that, though, give me a little bit more about that. How do I pay attention and start to, support them through these little nuanced changes from the role they were in to the role that they were now asked to do,
Yeah, so I'm not a construction expert, although I work largely in that industry, but I assume it's similar to a construction project. If you're going to build a building, you start out with where are we going to end up, and you reverse engineer it. So what I do with a lot of my clients is walk them through. This is not a leadership development exercise, but it's a planning through your staff needs and your leadership development needs, which is part of that exercise. And I just did this with a client that wants to grow from 3 million a year to 10 million a year. And so we developed a $10 million a year version of their company, drew out the org chart for it, to spend some time thinking through what's the stress that's going to be on the leadership team, what are going to be the requirements, management capacities that'll be needed, what will the project mix look like to support a $10 million a year company, those kinds of things. And then from that, you can start to look at who on your team has the ability to lead that kind of a project mix, that kind of a team at that kind of a level. And you can start to forecast it out. So it doesn't have to be something you react to or respond to. You can know, roughly years in advance of what kind of needs you're going to have. And based off of your current team, you can start to develop an individual growth track for each of them. It doesn't really take that much work. Altogether, planning that out can be an couple hour long exercise, and then you just update it and you keep working with your team.
Well, so let's start on that. So we start with the end in mind, right? So
Yeah.
what's the role going to look like, right?
Right.
Here, when we get there, what the role would be. And so we might look at the characteristics of, all right, they're going to need to be able to lead this group of people. They're going to need
Right.
to be able to train this group of people. They're going to have these financial reporting characteristics. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, those kinds of, that, but more. So for example, the client that I was talking about, this is a very tiny company. They want to grow from 3 to 10. It's a mom and pop shop right now. They want to grow to an actual company. And so part of it is looking at a $10 million company. You're probably going to want to have somebody in a senior PM role and not just being able to manage small projects. Right now, they're working with who they have on hand, who aren't necessarily ideal staff. They're just the people that they've been working with. And so part of it's thinking about if you want to be able to have a $10 million company or a $50 million or $100 million company and be free and not have more work and more burden on you, but it actually feels freer to grow, then what kind of a team are you going to need? And so you're going to need someone who has the general competencies of a good senior PM who can kind of help the other PMs do their job well so the owner doesn't have to get into that position. So some of that has to do with financial capacities. A lot of it really has to do with more self-management. Is this somebody who on their own can get from point A to point Z without needing a lot of management or guidance? And they can do it accurately. And you can just rely on them to take care of that. And then starting from where you're at right now, evaluating your current team, is there someone here that we can grow into that position? If not, we're going to have to find somebody outside. But if there is, then what kinds of experiences, what kinds of training, what kinds of coaching, what kinds of support do they need to get to that capacity
I
in time?
feel like the mistakes I've made in maybe not knowing how to identify those characteristics I want from those people. Right. I think it's something you have to get really intentional about, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
something that's
And
really conscious about,
yeah. And so that's in the book, Train to Lead, I provide a leadership assessment. And so it's designed as a self-assessment, but you can always use it as an assessment of your employees. And it's a good way to identify both the order of competencies that somebody needs to build, and starting out with self-management at the beginning and then learning and growing into how do you align and direct the behavior of others. But it also gives you a good sense of what really. So here's the thing. A lot of this is based around the fact that when I'm working with executives or leaders or owners that are struggling with growth, the questions are almost never, how do I get the financing for this project? How do we do strategic? How do I run meetings? It's not those kinds of skills or tactical things. It's always, how do I deal with this low performer who I like? How do I deal with my lack of confidence? They don't say it that way, but you just see themselves
Oh, it
second
is for
guessing all their decisions.
right.
Yeah, there's the how do I hold my team to account? They're always doing different things. I can't get them to consistently do what they're supposed to do. It's these very soft areas. And that's what's a surprise, especially in construction, which is very concrete thinking. Most people that are drawn to construction are very concrete thinkers, and they're very, very strong executors. That's the kind of personality mix that tends to be
Yeah,
drawn and successful
yeah,
in that space.
yeah.
And then they discover, like, wow, executive leadership, senior leadership in this space, really, if you're going to be good at it, and not just bring in big projects, that's a part of building a good company, but being able to run people well really requires competency in soft skills and really being kind of a healthy human being, so that you're not self-medicating, that you're not managing stress in ways that are really not healthy for you or for others. And I want to point out something else here specific to the construction industry. Pre-COVID, it was common for many people in the construction industry to run from one man down concept of staffing. So they would tend to always have just a little bit less people than you needed, and you just go into overtime. You just work longer days. You just make it happen. And the demographic shift that really was already in the works, was already going to happen, but really was elevated during COVID. There's just not the people available. You're not going to find the people available. They don't exist. Just like,
Well, I think the thing, what happened was there was this big, the early 2000s, the .com world sucked out most of our talent, and people were like, there's no way I'm going to the trades, and the trades
right,
back then were messy and ugly and painful and
right,
a rough life. Today, the technology, the way that we operate, it can be. We're finding out that the trades are actually some of the places where you can have a great life, right? You can
yeah,
have
fantastic. Yeah,
right. You can have a
yeah,
safe environment. You can,
yeah,
you can make lots of money, right? We got
tons of
tradesmen that are
money.
making some really high dollars,
Yeah,
and it's not being taken over by AI, right? I mean,
right.
you still got a nice little runway in front of you for a great career
Yeah,
in the trades, and people are making some phenomenal money, and we need more tradesmen now. There's a huge
but there's a
deficit of them.
shortage. But there's a
Yeah.
deficit. Yeah, it was that 2008 with the the mortgage crisis. People stepped out of the trades. There's a number of things that happened. Plus, just demographically, Gen X is a very tiny generation compared to the Boomer generation. So, particularly when you're looking for leadership and senior leadership, typically, still about 60% of companies are still owned by or primarily led by baby boomers. As they're retiring en masse, they're looking for who's going to be the successor or who's going to replace me. And there's just there's smaller circle of experienced potential replacements. And so that means you're going to have to reach past many of them to, the millennial generation or Gen Z, and start training them quickly to step into this position. And that's the thing that most people overlook. And you can no longer do that on demand. That's, I guess, the point I was trying to make, was that you can't just hire somebody when you need them. So if you're going to grow, let's say you're a $50 million company and you're going to start pursuing $10 million contracts and really jump and scale. If you're going to bring those contracts in, you can't just hire qualified people as you need them. You're going to have to, very rarely will you be that lucky. You have to build them,
Well,
start
just
refining that.
what people are missing is that it takes time. Look,
Takes time.
there is no like book you can read. You might get some tricks, right? But to go from and this is really what one of the hardest things to get is to stand in leadership, right? There's the idea of leadership, right? Like, oh, I want to be a leader. Great. Of course, all of us want to be leaders, right? We all want to tell people what to do, right? That's the idea that people have of being a leader, right? I'm going to tell you what to do. No one's going to tell me anymore. I'm going to tell you what to do,
Right.
right? And that seems like of course I want to do that. But then you find out that leadership is maybe just the opposite, right? You start to find out that, people are telling you what they need, and you're trying to solve that need. And to stand in a space, to be able to go from the idea of leadership over here as an idea, to stand in the role of being a leader, right? To be a leader, right? There's a transition there, and that takes a little bit of time, right? You've got to go through a couple of battles. I mean, you might be able to find a couple of tricks of the trade to maybe make it quicker, right? If
Yeah.
someone pays attention or has great aptitude, You might be able to get them quicker, but the truth is it takes a little bit of time. I always tell people, I'm a great leader because I've messed up more things than you
Yeah.
can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's so,
and I think that path is undervalued. I mean, so part of my background's in athletics, and I used to be a strength and conditioning instructor, and that's kind of what drove the framework of the book. If you want to be a great athlete, even if it's not Olympic athlete, you just want to be a great athlete, you want to run 5Ks in your hometown, but you want to do a decent 5K. That's going to take time. Not like 3 months time. That's going to take some time for you to build the capacity, get the miles in, develop the mindset around it, develop the life habits around it to make that work. The thing about leadership that's different from all the other skills, and this is maybe the key point, is that leadership is about personal development. I can learn the skills of project management. I can learn how to run a meeting. I can learn how to negotiate a sale. I can learn how to deal with those things. Those are skills. But leadership comes out of who I am as a person. It comes out of my mindset. It comes out of how I see myself, how I see other people, how I see the world around me. And that you cannot change from reading a book. Not like that. You can have an epiphany moment and it helps you make a small change, but you need an accumulation of a lot of those to actually become someone who can gracefully handle the challenges that come with leadership, that allows people to build, that allows people to succeed, especially if you're trying to grow something.
well, here, there's a great old Spanish practice. Why people are Basque. You and I talked about that, right? So the old Spaniards used to take a bull and they would tie it to a tree. And in order for the bull to work in the fields to be useful to the owner, they would tie it to a tree and they would set the dogs off on it, right? And the dogs would go, and the bull would and it'd go crazy. And they would keep doing that until the bull wouldn't react. And then the bull became useful, right? If not, you take the bull on the field and it would trample you as soon as it saw a snake or a cricket or something, right? All of a sudden you get trampled to death. But leadership's a little bit like that, right? I mean, how many times you get a young leader who doesn't know how to react to something, all of a sudden, it happens to me all the time. They don't quite know how big a net to throw on the ideas, right? Everything that comes to them is the dogs barking at them, right? It's just, right? And they just don't get it. You have to go through that iteration a few times to go, all right, take a deep breath. You're learning. Here, I appreciate what you're doing. Like, look, because that comes from caring, right? But the ability to stand in the space and be able to assess it with the proper amount of weight, that's just a little bit of that's a little bit of work, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that ties to the athletic framework that I use in the book, Train to Lead. All athletic, like strength and power, if you're building those things, that all comes from, or endurance, that comes from stressing the body. It's a stress response. You stress the body to the point where your central nervous system says, we need to make a change here. And so it triggers changes throughout your body. You rest and you heal from that. And then now you're a little bit stronger, you're a little bit more powerful, you can endure a little bit longer. So you have to have stresses. However, if you stress the body too much, you break it, you damage it, or you fatigue it, and you start to create problems. And so a good training plan understands how to introduce intensity and stress at the right amount that you get change without actually hurting the person that you're trying to train. Leadership often doesn't do that. We often say, hey, we sent you to this training. We hired this coach for you. Now we're not only going to set the dogs on you, we're not going to like chain them up at all. They're just going to like be able to tear into you.
Yeah, right.
And you should be able to handle it. And when somebody doesn't,
of course.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. And so people get promoted to, hey, we need a new general manager. We're starting this new operation. It's going to be in the other state. We need a GM to run all of that. And they've been a great PM for a long time. Don't screw up. We're going to give you $20 million to run with. Don't mess this up. You're working with the Corps of Engineers. They get really angry easily. Don't mess it up. And it stresses them out. And it can be too much. And you want to have the stress, but it's knowing how do you progressively load somebody so that they can be successful.
So what I love about your book, Trained to Lead, is that it gives me a great step-by-step. Now look at leaders, all of you, this is one of those books that it's a handbook, right? It's not one of those ones you read once and put on the shelf and never read again. It really should be something that you thumb through every time you're thinking about growing somebody, right? It's one of those reference books that has such great, here, look, when I read this book, it's just brings such great visualization. And maybe you might change a couple things around. Like I like, first 30 days, right? They were talking about a 90-day process, right? And the first 30 days really starts with the foundation building, right? Let's talk a little bit about what are we doing in those first 30 days? Here, not that you're not training other stuff, but your goal is to get the foundational stuff in.
Yeah. So the way the book is designed with this 90-day framework is everybody I work with is too busy to focus on this stuff. They're all maxed out. They got too many things going on. And so I've learned to work with my clients, and I wrote the book to be able to make most of these practices and concepts not a new thing that you have to do, but a new way of doing what you're already doing. And so it's designed to dovetail straight into your current leadership or management responsibilities. When it comes to the foundations of leadership, it's the same thing as fitness. The first thing you look at is nutrition and basic healthy habits. If I don't sleep well, if I don't eat well, if I'm not hydrated, I'm not going to perform well as an athlete. You can literally translate those things to leadership. If you don't sleep well, if you don't eat well, you're going to have a hard time thinking well and performing well. Additionally, there's other nutritional resources, nutritional in the sense of the relationships that we surround ourselves with, the podcasts that we listen to. If I'm listening to things that are encouraging, that give me input, that give me fresh ideas, that support me, I'll grow. If I'm listening to people complain about the world these days or politics these
Yeah, it's
days,
bad food. It's like junk food, right?
bad food. Yeah, it
yeah.
tears you down and it limits your ability to see opportunity and respond to opportunity. So that's the first thing, is to get your healthy habits and nutritional mix better. The second thing is
so go back. So
yeah.
So this is the foundational stuff, right? This is
Very foundational.
foundational work.
Yeah.
So I'm a new person going into leadership. I'm talking about mind, body, soul, healthy behaviors.
Yes. Yeah. Very basic stuff. And you don't have to be new. Very experienced leaders end up as the CEO of the company because they were amazing at business development. They pulled in the money all over the place. They get promoted. Now they're the CEO. They're very personable. But the way they handle stress is they go home and they have 3 or 4 drinks, and they're not sleeping well, and they're not getting along well with their wife. There's no doubt that stress and those issues are going to somehow impact their ability at work. And
so healthy humans. So start with your humans going, all right, how can I make them healthier? Mind, body, soul, relationships, right? The healthier I can help my humans be, the better they show up and able to grow as a leader.
Absolutely.
Guys,
And
I love
for
it.
leaders, you lead out of who you are. You've got that.
That's right.
We are the tool. And
Yep.
so I have to, if I want to improve my leadership, I have to improve myself.
I would say that as a leader myself, I look at my life and go, how do I continue? Like you take these steps, right? You kind of go, all right, I did one step, right? Now I'm gonna take another step, right?
Right.
And then I started looking at those micro nuances, right? Where do I have the dust in the corners to go clean up, right? I can look at my, my little cheats in the way that I eat, right? Look, how could those little cheats in the way that I eat affect my ability to lead better? Now, it's funny because most, the old school people, the leaders I grew up with were all drunks, and take people to the bar, and my behaviors, and maybe as I started as a young leader, that's a lot what I did, right? But today my want is to create healthy, amazing human beings that are both great, great as their health wise, right? How do we really, take on extreme health, extreme ownership of our health? And today we have so much more data that we have of that, but also in the behaviors that we are, right? How could those little cheats at the table equal behaviors as I am as a leader, right? So it's hard. People don't see that often. And I think you starting there is a pretty good spot to be. That's a great fundamental.
Well, here's part of the interesting driver. I don't know the individuals that you grew up around, but I know the type. And broadly, one of the reasons that they were alcoholics is because that's how they were managing stress, managing strong emotions. That's how they were managing things. And so here's the thing about that is, if I no longer want to go to an unhealthy self-medicating type tool, whatever it is, my drug of choice, if I no longer want to use that, but I still want to grow a company, have an intense company that's it's assertively growing and all those kinds of things, I really now have to figure out, how do I run a company that doesn't have unnecessary stresses, where we don't just come in and yell at each other. We're not just rude to each other. We're not doing the kinds of things that amp up everyone's blood pressure, but instead we're running a smooth running company where people show respect to each other, because this just works well. And it will force me to try to figure out, how do I run an overall healthier company? That kind of company can easily carry growth and be resilient in times like COVID or whatever. You can handle that kind of stuff because you just have healthier people and healthier relationships in it. And part of that is driven by the senior leaders saying, you know what, I'm tired of myself going to these things to try to reduce stress. Why don't I just reduce the stressors, not by stepping away from a leadership or stepping away from ambition, but figuring out how to do this in a healthier way? That leads to a better running company.
Look, I think there's a plethora of tools to start with, right? Lowering the stress, giving me tools to deal with the stress. Look, the drugs and alcohol were, you know, right? It was that easy button, right? I mean, it was like, oh, turn off the pain.
Yeah.
Of course, it was great. It was a turn off. I remember the first time you drank and or smoked weed or whatever it was. It was like, but that easy button, you get to pull life where you're banging on it. It's not working anymore.
Yeah.
And now you're wondering, okay, look, I'm growing. That's not going to work anymore. Now I've got to create those other practices.
I got to
right?
figure it out. Yeah.
Right now, what are those? Is it mindfulness? Is it meditation? Is it the gym? Is it the, for a long time, I wanted life to be easier. Right. And I don't know that that's ever going to happen. Like leaders, guys, in all the 57 years I've been on this planet, 56 years I've been on this planet, I don't know life's gotten any easier. I think today I get on my knees and I say, world, higher power, help me to be stronger, right? Give me the ability to have a better mind. All right. To have great characteristics, find my thoughts, action, behaviors to be able to handle the things that are coming at us. Now, I love where you're at. Look, I love to have the world that says, I'm going to be able to walk into a construction building and not have it be, guns a-blazing every day. I just don't know.
Right.
I'm not sure the industry is quite there yet. Hopefully one day we'll get there. But,
the industry doesn't have to be there, but your company can be. And my clients experience this. So it's something that they move into, where as they grow, as they work on this, they experience. One of the best examples of this was a client that was a PM. The company had just been through a significant turnaround, and the president of the company was retiring. And so he was tapped to take over the company. People were nervous about him because he tended to, he would go on like a 3-day just working super, super hard and just busting out everything on projects or putting a proposal out or whatever it was. And then he crashed for 3 or 4 days and nobody could get a hold of him. And you just couldn't make that work. And especially as executive leaders, people were afraid about that. I started working with him, and over the course of a year, let's say 2 years. No, actually it was within 1 year. Within 1 year, they were able to grow from $20 to $40 million in revenue. So he massively increased the intensity of the work. He got married and had his first kid. He was also more at peace with himself. He also had more time available to work out and to be with his wife and to be with his new baby. And so he was able to add an enormous amount of complexity and stress to his life. But because he started putting certain practices in place, his ability to carry it became much easier. The analogy that I like to use from athletics, I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When I first started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I came into it, I was very strong, I was very fit, and I just knew how to manhandle everybody. That's all I knew how to do. I didn't understand any technique. And so I just went nuts. And anybody who knows Jiu-Jitsu, I was a classic spazzy white belt in the worst possible way. And what was interesting is, so I weigh about 200 pounds. I remember a 145-pound black belt, this little skinny, scrawny guy with, long hair and just kind of looked all hippie-ish and just didn't look like a guy who could beat me up. I remember him throwing me on my head and then tapping me out just because he somehow made his body so heavy I couldn't breathe. And I felt so weak and helpless with this guy who I should be able to pick up and throw, but I couldn't do it. And I realized that there's a skill set out there that allows you to move heavy, rough, violent things without putting a lot of effort into it, and you can control it well if you take the time to learn it. And so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for me is a great place to see how learning the mindsets and skills of, basically leverage and doing more with less can make you very, very powerful and effective, more than having a lot of strength, a lot of aggression, a lot of drive, a lot of enthusiasm. Those are all good, but they're often just misspent energy.
Yeah, having the technique, right? Does that come from reps, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it being
Reps and being willing to listen?
Reps and willing to be vulnerable, right? I always say, I didn't say it, but Jordan Peterson says it all the time. In order to be the master, I need to step into being an idiot for a minute,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Absolutely.
I've got to be able to step into that vulnerable spot of not knowing, the one that does, that insecure me, right? The part that's going to scare me a little bit. So, we start with the end in mind, right? We know what we want to do to build them. Our first 30 days is we're really starting to really create that healthy behavior, right? To help it. We
Right.
can't really work on the person if they're not healthy, right? A sick person in the role is not going to be able to hear us or be there with us. And now we want to start to build some relationship stuff. I love when you talk about building relationships with the organization, right? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So part of it's really about perspective, and move into so the book is based around the athletic or training principle of periodization, which is you focus on an area for a while and then you move on. So you're not trying to get mastery in an area. You focus on it, you get improvement, you move on, and then you cycle through. And so you're not getting stuck on one thing. You're continuously improving, and that, I think, frees up some people from feeling to need to have mastery. So the next thing after having these healthy habits is conditioning. And that has to do with perceptions, and that has to do with the ability to handle stresses and self-management. And so a lot of that has to do, I was just working yesterday with a client, and one of their senior team members is kind of an Eeyore personality. And he was talking about how when he looks at the world around him, he never sees opportunity. It's just all like threats or challenge or just nothing. He doesn't view anything in it. And that comes out that's shown up in his career, that comes out in his ability to lead. A big part of leadership is the ability to see yourself as someone who can produce success, to see other people as people who have potential. And I provide research around that in the book that shows how our perception of others actually impacts their performance, just the way we see them. There's a really interesting study just about how human beings perceive the performance of rats, how that impacts the performance of a rat as they run through a maze. Just how they're seen, and it's weird.
Just how they're seen. So
very, very well established research.
Huh. That's interesting. And I think that's oftentimes one of the things I love, is where you can really see the bigger picture from as a leader, as you start to grow people. I think great leaders see the goodness in people, right? The bigger them, to hold the high watch. Maybe we stand in a space of holding the high watch for our people. I think that's a fun spot to go to. Let's get into a little bit about the skill applications, right? So now we need to, we get through the kind of the vessel. We've worked on the vessel. Now we're going to start working on skills. Let's talk about a little deep diving out a little bit. I know you kind of just hit on a little bit, dive in a little bit more into the skill training.
Yeah. So the skill training, or what I call the strength section, in Russian fitness, they have the perspective, instead of saying I'm going to go work out, they have a perspective kind of culturally or linguistically to say I'm going to go practice. And so instead of going and just doing your deadlifts and your bench presses, I'm going to go practice my deadlift and practice my bench press. That little tiny shift, I think, is very valuable, of viewing strength or viewing the work that you do as not just putting in reps, but actually practicing that each rep is good, that each rep is maybe even better than the last rep, that you're maintaining consistency at your 10th rep. It's the same quality as your first rep. And so the skills, and this is all research-based, the skills that leaders want to look at have to do with and these are core skills that if leaders can do this well across industry, across cultures, they will be more effective as a leader. One has to do with the ability to inspire shared vision on your team. Another one has to do with being able to be a model to others, and to know specifically what behaviors or attitudes do I want to model, and how do I model them in a way that people pick it up. Like anyone
All
who's
right.
a parent.
So hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got to be able to get the core vision, right? So
Yep.
here, the leader that's training you has got to be able to get the core vision of their vision of core vision
Yeah.
into that person, right? We have to transfer it from their head,
Sometimes.
right, over to, right, or from
Well, there's two different ways,
someplace
yeah,
restored.
there's two different ways that I introduce that in the book. One is the leader may have a vision that they want to cast to others, or they want to transfer to others, and that's a valid way of doing it. The big challenge with that way of doing vision and presenting vision is it's very difficult to get buy-in from others. Like, people are like, awesome, great idea, you go for it. That's the typical response to that kind of vision. And so the skill set is how do I get buy-in? The other way to get vision is what I call vision gathering, which is to pull elements of vision out of your team. What are things that they aspire to? What are motivations that they have? What can they see as far as potential? And how do I pull that out of a group of people? And then as a leader, how do I assemble that? Kind of like one of those Top Chef type shows where they get a basket of weird ingredients and they have to make a really great meal out of it. That kind of idea of pulling vision that way, of like, how do I pull things out of my people, like these aspirational elements of who they are, and then create a meal out of this, or a vision out of this that's inspirational to them. That kind of vision takes longer to do up front, but you have everyone's buy-in. And then there's composites to do that. And the point I bring that up is there's some leaders who are naturally visionary. And what I want to emphasize to them is they're going to have to do the hard work of not just telling people about their exciting idea, but actually figuring out how to connect that excitement to what really motivates the individuals. And that's not easy to do.
No, for sure.
For the other individuals, there's leaders who aren't naturally visionary. And some of them feel like, well, maybe I'm not a leader because I just don't have these big ideas all the time, or I don't have massive drive. If they're able to see their role as someone who's a facilitator of vision or a curator of vision, and if I can figure out what are the desires in the team around me, and how do I take those desires or those ingredients and identify those, and then make something out of that everybody's excited about, you have a powerful force in that capacity. That upfront skill is not easy to do. But if you can do that, and you can get help, I help people with that. But if you can do that, you have the ability to have a very, very inspirational vision and motivating vision for your organization, even if you yourself didn't just wake up at 4 a.m. with this brilliant idea.
But I think, oftentimes what I notice is that deep down inside, we are all these massive creators. I really do believe humans are.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go back to that step you were talking about before, where when I work on mind, body, and soul for the humans that come to the company, when I work on that, right, when I start to look at, all right, just imagine you are this amazing leader, but I once had this great visualization that it was like you had this big thorn sticking out of you, whatever the life stuff that you're dealing with is,
Mm-hmm.
call it family issues or relationship issues or drug and alcohol issues,
Sure.
right? Imagine this big giant thorn sticking out of you, and we spend all this time trying to hide it, right? We put, all kinds of things over top of it to hide it. And now we're trying to walk around the world with this big thorn. We're hiding from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with it is the shame and guilt and all the stuff that
Yeah.
comes along with trying to hide those, those behaviors that are, look, at a cellular level, we can feel they're wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
It blocks the creativity. But
Yeah.
as we start to take all the padding off and get to that core issue, all right, what is it you're dealing with, right? Hey, I drink too much, or hey, I do this too much, or hey, I've got a relationship issue, or hey, I'm cheating on my wife, or hey, I'm not taking care of my health. I'm not looking to be the psychologist for everybody out there, but there are core issues with humans that
Yeah.
that hold us back. And when we work on those, what I find almost 100% of the time is that when I work on those, the creativity opens up, like this funnel
Yeah.
from the universe opens up wider, like the pipe opens up, and all the great ideas from the universe come in. And now I get creative, and I get inspired, and I get motivated. The energy flows better. It just feels like that work, which isn't always, a straight lined to outcome, right? It doesn't feel like that. But when I do work on that with those humans, or they help inspire them to do that work for themselves, the outcome of that becomes so much more powerful
Yeah.
than any trickery I try to give them. Here's 5 things you could do in a meeting, or here's 7 things you could do every
Yes.
morning. Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't, like they don't hook, they don't stay
Right.
for very long.
Yeah, I think it's because if you have, the thorn, whatever that is, the amount of energy and time and attention and your creativity that goes into managing or hiding that is just massive, and people grow up with that. My wife is she's a therapist, and she specializes in working with very, very severe trauma, like people with dissociative identities and like horror story type stories. And we've thought about writing a book together because I see so many successful entrepreneurs and leaders who have these traumatic backgrounds where there's like some kind of a deep wounding or thing that happened. Their response to it wasn't to curl up in a ball in a closet. They actually became really successful as part of their
Yeah.
response. And the way coping mechanisms came together and so on, it translated into certain areas of success, but there's that thorn element. There's this other side of it, which hasn't been resolved or dealt with. And I see that being a limiting factor in some way in their leadership or in their potential or their ability to enjoy the success that they've built, which is something else that many people have built something that really truly is a success, but they can't enjoy it. And that's sort of a tragedy. It's that,
Yeah.
if you've built a good company and you've got too much anxiety or fear to be able to relax and enjoy the thing that you've made. And so part of what we thought about doing, I don't know if we will, but we might, is just like, how do we address the fact that so many successful leaders seem to have also this trauma story or this thorn, this issue that needs to be addressed in some way. And most of them, because they have success, they don't see it, and the people that surround them are just giving them slaps on the back because they're mostly seeing the success. They're not seeing the other stuff.
Yeah, it's usually a pretty, you know, for me, I at least start to notice when I get stagnant, it's a pretty good shot that I need to work on something,
Yeah.
right? If as I get stagnant or stuck, or I get to a plateau, right? It's rarely the business stuff that I need to work on. It's usually something in the personal life to work on.
Yeah.
I love your book. It was inspiring. I love the 90-day folks. Go and get Christian's book and dive into it. Right. It's a great manual for you to look at. Christian, you had a great way of writing. You're very articulate, very insightful, nicely done with the writing of the book. It was a joy to read, and it's full. A lot of times I read books and like it could have been over in a chapter, but you did a great job of all the way to the end with this, and I think it's got some real crystal clear examples of things we can work on. So I would just make sure the audience will have links to it down below. We'll have some great stuff down there. How to get a hold of it, Christian. If people want to get a hold of you and have you work with them, what's the best way for them to catch up with you?
Best way is to reach out through my website, christianmuntean.com. Lots of free resources there, as well as a way to contact me.
Well, Christian, I have enjoyed it. Well, I've enjoyed it a lot, and I'll make sure that down below I'll have all the links to that. So, audience, go down there now and take a look at that. Christian, it's been a joy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, Anthony, this has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Hey, audience members, last week we broke 65,000 subscribers. It's unbelievable. You guys are blowing me away. I get goosebumps every day. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. We noticed that a lot of you guys in last week, we had 5,000 downloads last week alone. And we had a lot of guests that weren't subscribers, right? A lot of you got to the end of the show and you weren't a subscriber. Could you do me a favor and like and subscribe now? It means the world to all of us, the folks in the background, Alyssa and Joe, and the team that find us amazing speakers like Christian to come on the show. And those numbers make a difference in the guests that we get. We don't get these great authors unless the numbers make sense. So if you could take a second and go like and subscribe now, we'd be so grateful for that. And as always, thanks for listening.